Okay, so today we are looking at this is our 10th day of exercise physiology. So we're actually kind of changing pace a little bit, changing gears a little bit. We're going to look at the idea of like exercise and how it has positive health benefits, right? So like the positive impacts that exercise has on just our regular everyday health. And so in order to do that, we're looking at things, we got to look at some general statistics on like what it means to be like, when we say like, we know that exercise like makes us healthier, right? But like, we need to have some like baseline understanding of like really what that means. And then we're going to look at really the ideas of just being active today, more so than like the specifics of working out. It's almost like we're shifting gears out of the gym and we're really just trying to get our clients like moving, right? Like that's really our kind of talk today. So, you're not every one of your clients that you're going to have is going to be like a gym nut, and sometimes like that's a little bit hard. It's almost hard to have perspective on that sometimes, like as like a trainer, because we get so passionate, we get so excited about like exercise and we're so into it. But sometimes like your clients are like, like I find that like I like going for hikes with like my friends and stuff, but I don't really like the traditional like lifting of weights. And it's like that's okay. Like there's totally room for us to like play on like what your favorite things are, and try to find ways to get you excited about stuff that you might not appreciate. So that's going to be a little bit of our talk today as well. And so we were looking at the idea of, just the overall health benefits of just being active. So our objectives today, we're going to switch the conversation a little bit and look at some of the diseases associated with inactivity, the role that exercise plays in like regulating those things, how a sedentary lifestyle has affected like, Americans, but also just people in general. The idea of like exercise is medicine. We're going to talk about that, which is a really fun concept. Like obviously, like we are not like doctors applying like medicine, but we are doing a lot of like preventative care. We're going to look at the association between like life expectancy and regular activity, and then talk about like the idea of like exercise prescription, which is something that we definitely want to avoid. We are not looking for like prescribing anything, but in the same way that like a doctor might tell someone, hey, you need to get more active, and then we might tell someone like, well, you want to do this many squats, and then we'll talk at the very end there about like how to measure intensity in various different means, rather than from like, again, a traditional gym style, which is like, a percentage of your 1 rep max or something like that. Instead, we will talk about like, how to base it on maybe like someone's ability to talk or like hold a discussion and, be able to, base it on like their perceived effort, right? So we're going to talk about the Rpe scale today. So, oops, darn it, I always do that every time now. So looking at it, right, as we're looking at this, oh my God, are there more learning objectives? What is this? Is that 8 pages of, no, 7 pages of learning objectives? Come on, Nassim. Like, there's only so much you can intro and talk about what we're going to talk about. We're not even going to talk about, that's not even in this PowerPoint. I guess we will talk about like the how often like coronary heart disease exists. And then, yeah, talk about the benefits of strength and endurance. And how it can also help us. Good God. I feel like this PowerPoint is like nothing but intro slides. We're already like 10% of the way through the whole thing. All right. So, looking at the idea of being overweight, right? So we know that like a majority of Americans are very overactive, and we know that like, very, very underactive. And so by being very underactive, what are some of the drawbacks associated with that? Like, what are some of the things that you think kind of come along with being inactive? Obviously, some of those things are going to be like a lack of calorie burn, and a lack of calorie burn is going to result in maybe overweight. Without like being active, you're just not burning very much energy. And we know that like weight status is nothing more than like this equation of like energy in versus energy out. And so, yeah, there is like the idea of being overweight, but like, that's not really that big a deal, right? Like what is being overweight really like cause? Or Because I've known plenty of people who are actually, overweight and incredibly healthy. And I know plenty of people who are normal weight and incredibly unhealthy, but we do know that there is like a correlation. There is a link between being overweight and being unhealthy, right? That's a lot of times like what we see, and I think, again, like I think of a lot of the reasons for that is because like the same things that result in, the general things that result in someone being overweight are also the same general things that lead to an unhealthy lifestyle, not necessarily even that it's like your body weight, because, this is where we start talking about the BMI, right? So the body mass index is this thing, it's how we categorize, are you normal weight, are you underweight, are you overweight, are you obese, but it's only a calculation of like your height versus your weight, which is not a very good way to predict someone's overall health status, right? So we want to take a much broader view here rather than just looking at BMI to like, judge someone's health status. We got to look at like, all of these different factors, but it is definitely the first one that we can very, very quickly look at. And if your client falls into an overweight or obese category, that could be a warning sign and reason and cause for us to look for more things. See what I'm saying? So overweight, we're going to define this. It's being defined as having excessive body fat or more body fat than is optimally healthy, right? And this will be characterized as having a BMI somewhere between 25 and 29.9. Okay, so what is the BMI, right? Like, Kenny, have you ever heard of the BMI before? Heard of this concept?
BMI, something about heartbeat or no?
Not quite. No, actually, this is a different concept. This is actually something that we use to categorize your weight status. So when someone is defined as overweight or underweight or normal weight. So it actually has nothing to do with your heart's status. There's other things that absolutely do have to do with your heart's status that are actually much better predictors of health. But this is just one of many tools that we have to look at to analyze someone's like overall health status. And so what it's going to be defined as, the body mass index, the BMI, what it's going to be defined as is the weight of an individual in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. And Kenny, you're going to want to have that formula memorized. Charlie, I know you've seen this like a million times. And Kenny, you will in your future see this a million times. We come back to the BMI a lot, especially in this module. We're going to talk about BMI in this mod more than any other mod that we've ever talked about it before, because this is the weight loss mod. And so, we are definitely looking a lot at weight status. But like I said, it's your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared. Get this formula right here memorized. I'm not saying you have to be able to do this formula. I mean, for the most part, BMI calculators exist on the internet, so you just go BMI calculator and click it, and then you're like, hey, I'm 6'1" and I weigh 175 pounds. Boop. And there you go. BMI of 23.1. So, that's, we live in a world with smartphones, like, I'm not saying you actually have to do this math, but I am saying there will be a million different ways they will ask you questions related to like, what is the BMI? What is its purpose? And so you'll want to have this number memorized, and you will want to have these categories memorized as well. So underweight individuals are anyone who has a BMI of 18.5 or less. So let's go back here. Let's say I'm still 6'1", but now I weigh 145 pounds. That's still going to be fine. Let's say I weigh 135 pounds. That is going to put me at a BMI of 17.8. So if I were at a BMI of 17.8, that is underweight for my height. That would be dangerously low for someone as tall as I am. So what that means is like, that's a predictor of some, negative health status. So it's going to be, hey, we should work on gaining some muscle mass and putting body weight on actually. But our normal weight category is anywhere from 18.5 up to 24.9. So let's see, 140, oops, that's 1,140. 140 is 18.5. So at 6'1", 140 pounds is the lowest that someone of my height would want to be. So that's an 18.5. And then if we look at, let's see, 200 here, 26.4, 195, 25.7, 190. 189. There we go. 189 is 24.9. So at the lowest, someone of my height should be 140 pounds. And at the highest, someone of my height should be 189 pounds. But like, you know, all we're looking at here is body weight. Like, what if I'm 189 pounds and I've got like a body fat percentage of 25%? Well, 25% is a pretty high body fat percentage. So that might not be a very healthy weight. Yeah, I'm normal in the BMI range, but I could be like overweight in terms of body fat. Or what if I'm 200 pounds and, you know, my BMI is 26.4, but my body fat percentage is like 12%, you know? I mean, I'm gonna be jacked, right? I'm gonna be in great shape. So this is where we start to get into like the idea that like, I'm not a huge fan of using the BMI scale as a predictor and like a determiner of health. I really don't like the BMI. A lot of people will like use this as like, oh, my BMI is outside normal ranges, I'm unhealthy. And it's like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're unhealthy. So let's take a look and show you exactly what I mean here. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he won Mr. Olympia, he was the, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the most in shape person in the world as determined by, you know, the Mr. Universe competition, right? And so he weighed 235 pounds during that time. And then how tall is Arnold Schwarzenegger? He's 6'2". So we go back to this BMI calculator. We're gonna put 6'2", and we're gonna put, what was it, 235 pounds? 235 pounds. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, in his prime, when he won the competition for the most in shape person imaginable, right? He would have been considered, he had a BMI of 30.2, which you will notice puts him in the obese category. Hold on just a second. We just got Callie joining us. Callie, what is up? Miss Callie Cameron, how you doing? I think she's still connecting with audio. Hold on. There it is. What's up, Callie? How are you?
Good. I'm like so behind.
True story, but that's all right. Let's get you moving.
Okay.
All right. So right now we're just introing a little bit about like the idea of like exercise and health benefits. So we are looking at sort of this is our 9th lecture here, looking at sort of what it means to why exercise has positive health effects. So in order to talk about that, we first got to talk about how we categorize health. One of those ways is using the BMI scale, which I'm not a big fan of as categorizing health, but it is a scale that's very important in our job. So
Okay.
we were talking about how, like, you know, a BMI is considered underweight under 18.5, normal weight, and I want to put that in quotation marks, 18.5, 24.9, overweight is 25.9, or 25 to 29.9, and then obese is anything greater than 30. And we were just talking about how we looked up Arnold Schwarzenegger when he won Mr. Universe. He was 235 pounds, and he was 6'2", which would have put him in the obese category, right? So clearly we can see there are some flaws associated with like only taking into account someone's weight in order to determine their health, right? There's a huge, I want to be very clear here. There is a distinction between health and weight. However, there are some correlations, and we are going to get into that. But I want to start the conversation with realizing that like you are going to have clients who are overweight and in great shape, and you're going to have clients who are possibly underweight, and then that one actually is pretty rare. If you're underweight, it's usually, that one's almost always dangerous, but it's still possible to be in, you know, decent health. So health and weight are not the same thing. Very, very clear up top. I usually I usually make that overly clear because I think I overemphasize it a little bit. But obesity, right, with a category of a BMI above 30, we do know that there are a lot of people who are obese in the obese category who do have health problems. So it can be an indicator. It's just not a rule. So how does this, you know, how do we get to this weight status, right? Like what often leads to an overweight status or an obese status, right? Well, that is where we often look at like what our causes are. We know that inactivity is one of the biggest causes here, right? And so like, you know, some people who have like very sedentary jobs, or like even like, you know, you think about the world we live in now. My mom, my parents love antiques. They love antiques. They think it's really fun to have like antiques around. And so we had an antique washboard. And when I was a kid and I didn't do my chores, she would make me do laundry on that washboard and like pin it as like a way to like punish me for not doing my chores. And let me tell you, that is a lot of work. You know, I literally did my laundry the other day and then forgot about it because I can toss it in the dryer, hit start, and then leave and watch Netflix, right? So we live in a world where like we have this increasingly sedentary lifestyle, you know? I mean, we're able to have class right now over our computers and tablets and phones, right? You know, the temptation to be inactive has never been greater than in this version of the world. And so that, you know, 20 calories that's lost by not doing your laundry, that, you know, a little bit of energy that you save ordering your food rather than going to the grocery store, or even just like parking close in a parking lot rather than parking far away. Those little things, they add up over time, and they make our lives easier, but they're also what are leading us to not burning very much energy and using this athletic body that we have, you know? And so we see that due to this increasingly sedentary lifestyle, thanks to a lot of the amazing improvements in technology, we're burning less energy throughout the day. And so then, you know, our diets, which are either getting larger or even if they were just staying the same, if we're burning less energy, that's going to result in this accumulation of too much energy. And energy can't just go, you know, it can't just be like given away. Like energy, once it exists, you're stuck with it. You know, that's like the first rule of physics, literally. It's the first law of thermodynamics. And boy, are we going to talk about the first law of thermodynamics in a later class. But like, you know, once energy enters your body, you either have to burn it up by doing activity or it's going to get stored on your body. You know, that's how this works. And so since we're not burning very much, it's more likely that we are going to store a lot of this. And so there's obviously a huge benefit to exercising because exercising is going to burn off all that excessive energy. Because what happens is like if we're not active, number one, we're not challenging our body. So our body has no reason to try to keep like muscle mass and tissue and things like that around that makes us healthy. And number two, we do start to accumulate excessive body fat. And having like body fat is essential. Body fat is a really good thing. We're really glad that we have it. But when we have excessive body fat, it starts to wreak havoc a little bit inside of our bodies. It's too much of a good thing, honestly. Especially abdominal fat in particular. And we're going to talk about this in again, like later classes, but like Charlie, you're my only you know, sort of senior in here. You'll remember me talking about what's called the waist to hip ratio. And the waist to hip ratio is where we look at like how much, you know, abdominal fat you have versus overall body fat. And we know that like abdominal fat in particular is surprisingly dangerous. It starts to kind of act like its own organ. It starts to develop its own metabolism. and it's almost like this separate thing that's stuck on your body. And so it starts like messing up all of the organs around it. So it's interesting, like sometimes when we're analyzing body fat, again, it's not even about body fat. Sometimes it's about like your particular genetics and how you're shaped. And that's kind of an interesting part of this conversation as well. So that is some of the stuff that we're kind of looking at today. And then this module is all about like learning how to like, increase that calorie burn. And obviously, like I said, health is a much more complicated topic than simply how much you weigh. I hate it when people boil it down. It's like, if you're overweight, like I hate that. Because trust me, I've known people who are extremely heavy, who are their blood work is great. They're in terrific shape, and there are like genetic factors at play here. But here's what's great. We know that exercise in particular is incredible for us. We are animals who are designed to move. That is what we as like biologic creatures are great at. We've got these incredibly athletic bodies. And I love saying that sometimes because I'll get people who are like, it's like, well, I mean, like, I just want to be active. I'm not an athlete. And obviously I'm like, look, if you got a body, you're an athlete, like, I'm into that concept. So, regular exercise, we look at like longevity, right? The idea, we're all trying to find that fountain of youth, we know that longevity is affected by your physical activity. We know that it's affected by your nutritional habits. And then like, what kind of stuff are you bringing into your body? Like smoking, for instance, right? Smoking is so very bad for you. And I mean, just like smoking in general. I mean, anything that involves like, we got like vaping now. Yeah, it's terrible for you. Smoking like pot. Yeah, it's bad for you. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, there's some incredible, CBD is so popular now and it's all being like legalized and stuff. And there's some amazing things that like cannabinoids can do inside like the human body. But like delivering it through your lungs is a horrible idea for anyone. And it's just because like this is an environment that needs to diffuse oxygen, right? And you're putting stuff in the way, right? If you think it's hard to breathe through a mask, like imagine your lungs trying to do that on a cellular level, right? So we're, those are things that affect our longevity, right? And so, when we see clients who are inactive, we can start to see things like sarcopenia, right? Sarcopenia is a decrease in the number of muscle fibers. So this is kind of interesting because like, yesterday, we just talked about this in yesterday's lesson, right? We said, we mentioned how, for the most part, when human beings experience like muscular growth, right? We experience a little bit of what's called hyperplasia, which is the growth of the number of muscle cells you have, but it's very indirect. It's something that, isn't necessarily something we can train for. But hypertrophy is something we can train for. Hypertrophy is taking your muscle cells and making them larger. Your muscles will go, holy crap, we were not strong enough to deal with that resistance. We need to, become like a stronger cell. And so then it will make new proteins inside of that cell to get better at contracting and stronger and stuff. And so then, because there's new proteins shoved into that cell, the cells get larger, right? So that's what hypertrophy is, right? Hyper from the word large, and then trophy from, I think, to eat, actually. So it's like you're, body blows up. But inactivity, so hypertrophy is the growth of cells, but it's not the growth in the number of cells. But sarcopenia is a loss of the number of cells. And that is something that does come from inactivity, which means once you lose them, it's going to be difficult to get them back. And so we keep an eye on stuff like that. We keep an eye on sarcopenia. It's something that like your doctor, is gonna want to watch for. And then obviously there's also atrophy. Atrophy is the opposite of hypertrophy, which is where your muscle fibers shrink. Atrophy, for the most part, can be reversed fairly easily, but sarcopenia is a much larger uphill battle. And the same thing is true of osteoporosis. When we're inactive, we experience osteoporosis, right? Which is a decrease in your bone density. Your bone cells, right? They are these little flat cells that kind of look like the rings of a tree, and they're like stacked on top of each other. And every time you are active, you are fracturing your cells. You know, you're creating little like microfractures in your bone. You know, think about like if I'm doing like a dumbbell lateral raise, right? I got 2 dumbbells in my hand here, and I do like this abduction movement. And I'm doing lateral raises here. You know, I got this big long lever, and you know, it's almost like taking a pencil and just bending it, right? And if you take, you know, pencil like a wooden pencil, and you're bending, and you hear those like, you hear all those little fibers cracking on the inside. The same thing's happening to your bones. Or your bones are experiencing like this bending because of all this heavy weight that you're lifting and living your everyday life, and then like the impact of walking and running and doing all these activities. And that those little microfractures are a good thing because that signals to your body. Your body goes, oh yeah, I need to do my general repair on the skeletal system. And if you create like a lot of damage, your body will go, well, you know what? Like I'm gonna make this bone a little more resistant to damage, right? So that's why exercise increases our bone density, is because like when we are nice and active, we create little fractures and your immune system repairs it. But rather than repairing it back to where it was, it repairs it to make it more damage resistant in the future. This is why you'll actually see some of the highest bone density athletes in the world. This is so funny. There's a really interesting article. I think it was this one here. It was really interesting. They looked at rugby players' bone density in their shoulders. So rugby, I don't know if you guys have ever watched rugby, but they start in what's called the scrum. And it's where you literally line up shoulder to shoulder against your opponent, and you are grinding your shoulders into each other. Let's see here. I'll show you the. Imagine like football, but rather than running up and hitting each other, it's rugby scrum. You can see they'll actually line up like this after the ad. And then after the second ad. Double ads. So you see them line up and they're just shoving on each other like crazy. And they've looked at the bone density in rugby players' shoulders and they're through the roof. They're off the chart. Look at this guy kicking the ball behind him, right? That's crazy, right? Like, and it's just because they've experienced like so much cellular like damage that their body has like repaired it, and your body, you know, it's like you, if you were to like, you know, fix something on your house and then like somebody tore it down, and you'd be like, all right, the straw house didn't work, I'm gonna make my next one out of sticks, you know, and then like that get torn down, like mother trucker, I'm making it out of brick, you know, like that's your body's approach to like fixing things. That's why our muscles grow, but it's the same reason why our bone density grows as well. And that's why exercise is so important for our skeletal system as well. And if you don't use it, you end up with osteoporosis, or can, or osteopenia. Osteopenia is the road to osteoporosis. Osteopenia is like, it is on it's like you, that's a loss in the density. Osteoporosis is where it's actually like, you know, a certain level low for your age and body weight and stuff. That's why like, and women need to watch out for this more than men do. Osteoporosis is much more common in women due to some hormonal changes that happen like in seniorhood. And so it's something, that's why like a lot of times like doctors will consistently weigh senior women frequently. And they do it because if they see like a massive drop in body weight very, very quickly, that it's like, oh, that's, and then they'll immediately, that tells them to check for bone density. And sure enough, like they'll often find that like they weigh less because their bones are lighter. So another one that we see from being inactive, another one of our negative effects that we're going to see here is depression. Exercise has really positive effects on our brains, guys, like incredibly awesome positive effects. You know, when you think about like how your brain works, right? It's a series of, you know, these little chemical receptors where endorphins and hormones and neurotransmitters bind in order to trigger certain events inside of the brain. When you exercise, you make actually, I mean, you make a lot of stress actually. You're actually stressing the body. But it's the good type of stress, right? And so that stress gets flooded throughout the body, and then your body, in response to that stress, decides to make anti-stress hormones, right? It makes all of the good endorphins. This is why you feel so good when you're done working out, is because you created all this like stress, and then your body goes, man, I need to flush all that stress out in order to like, create all the positive stuff, right? This is a part of the, again, the reason why like we are hardwired to be active, athletic creatures. We are hardwired to exercise regularly. It is in our DNA. And when you don't exercise, you don't create some of that. And so then like other, normal like stress hormones get created, and then they just float around in your brain. They start binding to those neurotransmitters, and that can lead to depression, anxiety, and all kinds of other problems. And it's a reason why, like, if anybody in here knows someone with depression, it's a very good idea to get active. It has incredibly positive effects on like your brain status. We see coronary heart disease with inactivity. Being inactive, being sedentary often leads to coronary heart disease. Love my mom to death, but like, just harsh truths. My mom is a very inactive person, and, I've tried to like get her, active for years now, and she's been much better in the last few years, but it is 100% what led to her heart attack. My mom had a heart attack last year, and she's come back from it, much stronger. But that was like, because it was like an eye-opening event. They call it, she had the type of heart attack where it wasn't like super incredibly terribly life-threatening. But it was, there's a term for it that's like a colloquialism term. They call it like an angel on your shoulder heart attack or something like that. But basically it was like the type of heart attack that wasn't really at risk for like taking you out of this world, but it was the one that's like, hey, wake up, like, and so like she's been really good about getting active, and she just went to the doctor 2 days ago, and her blood pressure has normalized for the first time in years. Her cholesterol is still out of control, but like, and it's because she's been much more active lately. So being active, working your heart, it's not just about strengthening your heart, it's also about strengthening your blood vessels, right? Whenever you exercise, your blood vessels expand, and when you stop exercising, they constrict. And so, that is no different than lifting weights, doing repetitions for your muscles. Diabetes, we know that being sedentary can result in diabetes. This is one of the particular reasons why, again, abdominal obesity is so much more dangerous than like a lot of other types of just being overweight in general. Abdominal obesity in particular has been associated with diabetes, and high blood pressure, which we'll see here in just a second. But diabetes is a hormonal disorder. Right? There's two types of diabetes, and we'll talk about this later, but there's type 1 diabetes, and that's basically where you've got a bum pancreas, right? So sugar is in your blood. I'm going to give you a really brief rundown here, right? Your digestive system breaks down carbohydrates into glucose. That glucose enters your bloodstream, and now you've got sugar running through your blood so that it can deliver sugar to your cells, and then your cells can produce energy. So we love having sugar in our blood. The problem is, though, when you get excessive levels of sugar in your blood and they just sit there, they can actually suffocate your cells, because then your cells lose the ability to bind oxygen very effectively. There's so much sugar being carried that your blood has a hard time carrying other materials, and one of those materials is, molecules of oxygen. So like, when we think about diabetes, it's we think about like sugar and stuff, and we're like, yeah, sugar's bad for you. And it's like, it's not just that it's bad for you, it is literally suffocating you on a cellular level. And usually the areas that like struggle with this are our small blood vessel, low blood flow areas. And this is why we see neuropathy, and nerve damage and things like that, usually in the peripheral parts of our body. So you'll hear diabetics struggle with like a lot of like problems with their toes or their feet or like fingertips. Those are the areas that are most at risk with diabetes. And we're gonna have a much longer conversation, well, the whole day where you spend talking about diabetes and how it works and the positive effects of exercise. So we're just doing a very brief overview here today, but you know, that sugar, how do we get that sugar out of our blood? We exercise, right? And so by exercising, we're burning that sugar up as a fuel source. So it makes sure that our blood sugar levels normalize, right? So type 1 diabetes, you know, how do you get that sugar out of your blood, right? How does that sugar get pulled out of your blood? Well, you know, that's where your pancreas creates hormones in order to do that, particularly the hormone insulin, right? And insulin's job is to pull that sugar out of your blood and drive it into your cells, right? So that it can be used and get it out of there so it doesn't suffocate. If you have type 1 diabetes, you basically have a pancreas that isn't producing enough insulin. But if you have type 2 diabetes, that's where your pancreas is creating enough insulin. In fact, it's creating tons of insulin because we keep bringing in so much sugar in our diet or, you know, in through just normal carbohydrates. And then we don't ever burn that sugar up because we're not very active. And so then it just stays in our blood, broken down as sugar. So there's so much sugar running through our blood. The pancreas is working overtime to produce all this insulin. And now it's almost like a drug, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are big coffee drinkers in here. I'm pulling open for the reaction shot. Oh yeah, I mean, coffee. You know, like you get, you know, I remember the first time I ever like really, it was like I was like in college and I was just like, oh, I'm so tired. And everybody's like, well, go to the Starbucks. And I was like, I'm not much of a coffee drinker. I've never really goofed around with coffee. And they were like, give it a shot. And I was like, this is amazing. Oh my God, this stuff is great. It's bitter as hell. And I don't like the taste of it yet, but I'm going to get there. I feel amazing. You know, like I can see new colors. Is this what the world normally looks like? You know, like I felt great. And now I'm like, you know, going on like my 5th cup a day. No, I'm kidding. Thank God. But like, you know, like you get resistant to it, you know, your body gets used to that caffeine. Same thing is true with insulin. Your pancreas is creating tons of it and your cells are starting to become resistant to insulin. And that's what type 2 diabetes is. And that's why it's, you know, we need to take like diabetes, like, you know, insulin. You need to take insulin shots is to raise those levels because it takes a bigger and bigger hit of insulin to drive that sugar out of your blood. But that's very dangerous as well, right? This is why this is a disease that your doctors want to give you more insulin. They want you to wean you off of it, right? Because like we don't want to get to a place where we need more and more and more of it, because eventually, you know, there's only so much you can get into a freaking hypodermic needle. And all, you know, and so that's diabetes in a nutshell. We know that's associated with sedentary lifestyles and, like I said, abdominal obesity. We see asthma, right? Asthma is a problem with, like, again, driving oxygen into our body is a respiratory disorder, right? And that can come from a couple different things. It can come from being inactive and maybe you just have a weak diaphragm that's having trouble driving air into your lungs. That can lead to shortness of breath. But it can also just be like you don't have enzymes in your blood that are pulling oxygen out. You don't have hemoglobin to carry that. You know, asthma is not always just like, a lot of times you'll hear like some wheezing sometimes, and that can be a form of asthma. But like, it's not always just directly like someone having trouble. Sometimes it's all the way on a blood cell level. Then we have hypertension. This is a really big one, high blood pressure. You know, your blood vessels, there's 2 parts of this, right? There is your blood vessels need to have the ability to contract and, to contract and expand regularly, right? But they also need to be empty. And so with like poor diet and poor exercise, you might leave cholesterol in your blood vessels, and then that cholesterol builds up and blocks the tube. Or maybe they just harden because they're not used to like opening and closing, right? Both of those things associated with a sedentary lifestyle. So, those are some of our general, and I know this has been very doom and gloom for this lecture so far. We've been talking about all the bad stuff that happens by not being active. But do you have any questions on, any of that, or comments or concerns? Like, how you guys feeling about, like, we're starting to see, like, I think at this point we've made a really good case for exercising. But do we have any comments or questions? Everybody feeling good? All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at, let's look at the journey of someone who's new to exercise, right? Because like I said, today, until now, a lot of times we have perspective on, it's like, you're a trainer, let's talk about squats and thrusters and burpees. Yeah. Let's talk about just the idea of getting active. Let's almost look at this outside of the realm of like a personal in the gym trainer. And now we're really just looking at it from like as a health expert coach, right? And by the way, that might be where you guys find yourselves. I know that like most of this call is like a lot of newbies. Charlie, you're my only like senior on the call right now. But like a lot of you guys are newbies. I have found so many students who have graduated from Sochi who, they're like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to work in a gym. And I'm like, that's fine. I've had students go on to become life coaches. I've had students go on to become, nutritionists. That's what we're here for. There's so many jobs in the realm of fitness, guys. So hopefully this, for those of you who picture yourself at 24-hour fitness, think about today as like a way of like, well, maybe you find yourself instead life coaching, and you're going to people's houses and you're just finding ways to like, change their lifestyles, right? So let's say you got a new client and they really just want to become active, right? They're just trying to increase their activity, right? So, first you want to encourage them to really get like an actual like medical evaluation. I do this all the time where I'm like talking to my clients, where I'm like, look, you and I could theorize and hypothesize about like what's going on with your knee, why you have this shortness of breath problem. We could think about it, and I could educate you on all of the things that cause shortness of breath. And I could talk to you all day about like what causes knee problems, back problems, shoulder problems, ankle problems, whatever. We could talk all day about it. But until you go see your doctor and like get medically checked out to figure out like what is structurally going on, it's all going to be theories. Like our job, guys, is never to diagnose medical conditions. That is outside of what is called our scope of practice. And scope of practice is an important thing for you to know, like clearly, what is your role as a personal trainer? Just like, like medical doctors, they went to medical school. They know everything there is to know about diagnosis of like medicine and this and that. But if a doctor told you to do 15 squats, 10 push-ups, and 5 squat jumps, if they told you like how many reps of like whatever exercise to do, that is totally outside of their realm of expertise. We are experts when it comes to working out. Doctors are experts at diagnosing, right? Different strokes, different folks, right? We got different roles to do different things. So, first thing you want to do, encourage your clients, get a medical evaluation, right? Let them figure out like what's going on. And then, once that's afforded, like once they've figured that out, you can begin like a low intensity, just walking program. Get them out there, get out the door, get active and start walking. This is one of our biggest tools that we have at our disposal. We're going to have our special populations class in about 16 weeks, 17, 18 weeks, when we're getting into like, it's 2 months away. But when we're getting into our special populations class, that's where we're really diving into a lot of these diseases in particular. And we talk about this concept of exercise being medicine. And the first thing you start people with is just walking. And so we see like activity guidelines. The general activity guidelines that are recommended are nothing more than about 150 minutes per week of low to moderate intensity aerobic activity. That means if you can just get 150 minutes of walking in per week, that is the bare minimum that is recommended, that has been shown to have really positive health effects, right? Or if you can't make 150 minutes work, and by the way, that's 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, take the weekends off. Right. But if you can get 75 minutes of vigorous intensity, like you can actually get your heart rate up, get a little bit out of breath, that's 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week. That's not that hard to achieve. And it has drastically positive effects on our overall health. So we really do look for, just starting by just getting up, get out the door and get active. If you guys ever want to watch one of my favorite documentaries, not because, documentaries in a lot of ways are often trying to sell something, and no more so than this documentary. But like you look at, it's from several years ago, but it's called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. And it's all about the juicing craze, and it's all about like why you should get into juicing. Do not let that movie sell you on juicing. I'm not against juicing, but I'm also definitely not for juicing. It's fine, but like, this documentary is like, it'll solve all your problems. I don't like that documentary because of that. I am not a juicing fan. The guy who produced it, by the way, who's like the main star he's the subject matter of this documentary, is the CEO of a company that sells juicers. So take the juicing recommendation with a giant grain of salt. But what I do like about it is the idea of the documentary is that this guy, he was obese, and he had a lot of like skin problems and rash, he had a lot of like autoimmune problems. And he went to his doctor and he's like, what, he saw an immunologist. And he's like, what is going on with my immune system? Why, when I sweat, I get a rash, like what's going on with my body? And he's like, look, man, like you've got inflammatory problems all over your body. He's like, your body is just fighting back. Your immune system's job is to like fight foreign invaders, but your cells have become so unhealthy that your body is basically at war with itself. And so your immune system's attacking you. And so it was like a really big, like eye-opening sort of wake-up thing for him. So he literally does like a 90-day juice fast where he eats zero food, only drinks juice for 90 days. And he's all like, it's got all the vitamins and minerals you need and stuff, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, and I've got so many calories on my body, that's what I'm surviving on. Again, not a fan of that aspect of this documentary, but the reason I bring this up, my favorite moment in the whole thing, he also goes around, he's trying to find somebody else to do it with him. And everybody's like, no, what? No, of course not. Of course I'm not going to not eat for 90 days. So he's going around, but he finds one guy who finally calls him back, and he's a truck driver. And so that really like speaks to me because my family is, I come from a long line of truck drivers. And this guy is 500 pounds, this truck driver. And, he's like, he calls him back and he's like, I'll do it. I'm interested in doing it. And he's like, what made you change your mind? And he was talking about how, his doctor was telling him, he's like, look, you're only in your 40s, but like, we need to start planning for your funeral because you're not going to make it much longer. He was in terrible shape and this and that. And it was a really eye-opening moment for him. And man, here's my favorite part. In the beginning, he's like, all right, well, part of this is we got to get you active. He's like, how much do you think you can exercise? He's like, I don't know. And he's like, we're just going to start by walking. He's like, how much do you think you can do? He's like, I think I can make it to my mailbox and back. And it's like, it's this moment you're like, oh God. So he gets up and he's working so hard and he makes it to his mailbox and he makes it all the way back to the guy and he's exhausted. I mean, it wipes him out. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like how hard, this guy's journey. And now the rest of the story is mainly about the main guy, right? The main guy who started the whole thing. So it cuts forward to his story, and they got all the footage, and then they edited it all together, and then all they did was they checked back in with that guy months later, as this as the movie's going through its editing process and stuff, and it just ends the whole movie with like, the CEO of this juicing company, I said, like, he's in really good shape. And it's like, and we checked back in with so-and-so. And this guy's from like Minnesota, right? And it's the middle of winter in Minnesota. So it's like there's feet of snow everywhere. It's covered. And you see him strapping on like a snow jacket and snowshoes and like a snow cap. And he's walking out the door and he's going for a jog. And he's jogging a couple miles and he's lost all this weight. And he's like, taking care of himself. He's still very, very heavy, but like the dude who could barely walk to his mailbox and back is now going for a jog in the snow. And like, I remember watching this and being at home by myself, like, you know, just like bawling. I was like, oh, this guy, he's doing it. And I'm going nuts, like crying my eyes out. And I was so moved by it. But so if you ever get a chance, you know, I totally just ruined the best part of the movie. I apologize. Should put up a spoiler alert. But, you know, he started with walking. And that's honestly, guys, like, I know that as trainers, sometimes we want to do a lot. We want to get our clients squatting and pushing, you know, push-ups and bench press and all this fun stuff. But it starts with walking. So that's the beginning of a lot of people's journey. So if you can't start with a low intensity walking program, then, you know, start incorporating some stretches for your muscles before and after exercise. Let's get our clients evaluated and figure out like what stretches they need to do. Now, this part right here is something that you are literally going to hear me harp on for the next 9 months. I'm going to be talking like crazy about like what specific stretches to get into, but we're not diving into it today. But just as a quick, very brief example, let's say you as the trainer do an evaluation on someone's posture and you notice that they've got a really bad rounded shoulder situation, right? So, you know, they've got this like rounded shoulder thing, they got this forward head posture, right? This is their baseline posture rather than like sitting the way we should be, like nice and upright, right? If you know that someone's got rounded shoulders, we know what muscles change that posture, at least some of us do, and the rest of you will when I'm done with you, right? But like we know the muscles that pull the shoulders forward like this, right? Those are your pectoral muscles and like your pec minor, right? We know the muscles that tilt us down like this, right? Those are muscles on the top of the neck and your scapula and certain muscles of the upper back, right? We know that those are the muscles. So if those are the muscles, if this person's being pulled like this regularly, what do we got to do? We got to stretch those muscles and get them back to that neutral position. So we are going to choose stretches that are specific to our client, depending on what their posture is. Kenny, you remember when we were in the park the other day? And I was like, and you asked me, I was like, ooh, we got to stretch out those calves and we got to do this stretch. And you're like me, you've got like, you got the tight calves, you get the tight hamstrings. You're like, how do you know that? I know it because it's my job. Like that's going to be your job, right? I know it because we understand what muscles cause what type of posture. Callie, you might have totally different muscles that need to be stretched out. Charlie, you're going to have your thing. Charlie, you got the like, I remember you got the little bit of asymmetry, right? You get the like the one like slightly tighter side than the other.
Yeah, on the right side, I think.
Yeah. I never asked you, by the way, and I totally meant to. Are you a wallet back pocket guy?
I used to, it's been a while. I kind of switched to, yeah.
Yeah, that sometimes causes asymmetry, especially if you're like driving a lot on your wallet or sitting a lot on your wallet. It can cause your one of your QLs to tighten up like crazy. Those muscles on the pelvis that, you know, basically make you do this move. You know, you sit on your wallet, it actually tightens up one side and loosens up the other. So that could be the stretch that you need. You know, Cody, I know we get the ankle stuff, right? So like everybody's going to have different stretches to do, and that's our job. We got to look at it. We got to analyze. We got to figure out what it is, and we got to stretch those out. You know, totally. Somebody like me, I do not need to do hip flexor stretches. My hip flexors are fine, but my hamstrings need a lot of work, right? So we start, get your client out the door, right? You want to start on getting somebody active, walk them, right? Once they start walking, get them to start stretching. Once they start stretching, now that we've like sort of implemented a couple lifestyle changes, let's get into the jogging with the walking. Right now we can get into the more intense stuff. Doesn't have to be jogging. Maybe it can be going for a swim. Maybe it can be doing a little bit of like on the bike, right? It's about getting the habits formed, right? It's about getting it into your bones, getting active, right? Don't see yourself as someone who has to like start exercising. See yourself as someone who is active. And that's one thing that I always encourage people to implement into their clients as well. You know, don't think of it as like, oh, I got to work out today. Think of it as like, I get to work out today, right? like today is the like Birds fly, fish swim, grass is green, sky is blue. I'm an active person, right? These are all just facts of the universe, right? That's the sort of mentality that we want to get into our clients' bones. And it starts, like I said, it starts with walking. Walking is such a powerful tool. Now, let's make it harder, right? Let's say we're going to move forward through time. It's official. Our client is exercising regularly, right? They've officially started getting a little bit more active. So now we can start implementing some new stuff. So this is where now we start to recognize, like, what's the type of exercise that is not only going to be most beneficial for my client, but also something that they're going to stick to regularly. So Callie, we just haven't had very much like time to get to know each other very, very well yet. So I'm going to kind of pick on you just a little bit because it's an opportunity for me to get to know you a little better. What's your favorite activity when it comes to working out? Like, what are you into? What do you like? What do you dislike? Oh, hold on. You're still muted. Wait, no, I can't hear you. You got to hit the mute button.
Sorry. So I love lifting weights, and I don't like spin class. That would be my two love and hate things. Yeah.
Right. Fine. Love it. You know what?
But I like to change it up. I don't like doing the same thing all the time. So, some days I'll go swimming. I live by the beach in San Diego, or I'll go hiking. I love hiking Torrey Pines. So I like variety.
I hear that. That's great. Yeah. And then what's great about weights is like, that's the easiest one to have lots of variety. There's nothing easier you can do, a weight cardio session 5 days in a row, and none of them look similar, so you get an advantage there for the brain that likes variety. And I'm with you about the spin thing, man. I love running. I'm a runner. Hate spin classes. I got a bony butt, and I've every cyclist I've ever talked to is like, they're like, it goes away after like a week. It only takes like 1 week and then your butt gets used to it. I'm like, I'm not willing to spend that week.
I'm with you.
Yeah. And I've done triathlons, I just spend the whole time up on the bike, and they're like, well, that's inefficient. I'm like, don't care. I'll make up for the time on the run. I will get those minutes back. So yeah, that's okay. So now let's go back to type here, right? So now I know a little bit about like what your interests are. So then what I would do if I were your trainer, I would then assess like, well, what are your needs, right? And so I would do a full workup. We would do a fitness assessment. And Charlie knows this because, we talk about assessments all the time. We haven't really gotten into it yet with a lot of you new guys, but we're going to be getting into it. Assessments are such a huge part of what we do, and really, guys, you'll hear me talk about assessments a lot because I'm also extra passionate about it because I love the process of problem solving. I'm fascinated with the science of problem solving. If you were a mechanic, first thing you need to do, figure out what's wrong with the car, right? That's why your mechanic's like, well, what sounds it make? And you're like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, I want to do an impression of the goofy sound my car's making. I feel like an idiot. But they need to know. They need to have a general idea of like what's going on. Then they need to do like a diagnostics. And by the way, I know nothing about cars, but I do know that if you're a mechanic, a doctor, a personal trainer, a dentist, anybody, right? A repairman, I don't care what you are. First thing you need to do is identify the problem, right? Figure out what's going on. You need to gather data. Then once you have that problem, you can solve it, right? Once I know what's going on, I can come up with a solution. Then all I got to do is get you to implement that solution. So this is where first things right off the bat, we're going to do a really detailed assessment with our clients, right? They're going to get that medical evaluation. They're going to come back to us and we're going to do a full workup assessment. I'm going to be like, this is what I can see about your knees. This is what I know about your shoulders, right? And then we can determine the type of exercise that's going to be most effective. So type is the type of exercise. The type of exercise is actually irrelevant when the objective is just to increase your overall health and well-being. But trust me, it's going to come back later with a vengeance. So honestly, I don't need to be picky. I love running. I do not need you to run. I need you to be active. What do you like? Let's do more of that, right? My mom loves gardening. She hates working out. She just despises exercise. She loves gardening. So I'm like, great, garden, get gardening for an hour a day, but you're not allowed to sit down during that full hour, you know? And she's like, well, what if I don't need to garden for an hour? What if I get done early? I'm like, great, walk around the garden, admire your wonderful handiwork, you know? Little did I know this would result in her turning the entire house into the Amazon. There's so many plants in my parents' house now, too many. I was back home and I was like, I love nature. And I was like, this is too many plants. Like, I was like, it was like, you're getting old. You're going to trip over these plants. I'm going to come up here with a flamethrower and burn them. But regardless, anyway, you know, but that type of activities, regardless, if general health. Now, here's the thing, the fitter you get, the greater of a stimulus you're going to need, which means the fitter you get, the more specific we are going to have to be, which means we are going to narrow that type down to the types of things that are hard enough. You know, like, again, like I just said, I love running. Hiking doesn't do it for me anymore. It's very weird because everybody's like, you're so active, come hiking with us. And I get invites to go hiking all the time. And it's weird, but there's so many times where I'm like, I got a thing, or I'm okay. Because honestly, like, it's nice to go for a walk, but like, I can't use that as exercise anymore because it's just not at the kind of pace. And that's what happens when you get to a certain level, right? And you guys experience that, right? It's like 5-pound dumbbells don't do it anymore. And that's great. That's a champagne problem. What are we gonna do with all this champagne? We got too much champagne, right? We love that problem. So if you're in the beginning, the overall objective is just to get active. But then eventually considerations are going to be made based on the individual that you're training. And we're going to get more and more specific. So we need to put more of an emphasis on endurance first and capacity second, which is a problem that a lot of people have. I love this quote right here. But we really do have, like, you're going to see this first day on the job as a trainer. We see so many people who are like, I want to be able to bench this much. And it's like, it's not about how much you can bench. It's about being healthy. Let's start with, you know, endurance. We can get like you to lift heavier later. Right now, we just need to get you healthy, right? So many people start comparing themselves like, I want to be able to run this many minutes in a mile. That's great. Again, that's like, we can deal with that capacity later. For now, let's get you active. Do not let perfection, do not let like a high level, like you hear this phrase all the time, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. I have a problem with that, like, a lot sometimes, where sometimes I'll be like, I'm a perfectionist about something and I'll work on it for like a really long time and it keeps me from doing other stuff. Or I won't start something because I want to do a perfect version rather than just doing something for now. You know, when you're starting someone on an exercise program, just get them up and moving. It doesn't need to be the hardest workout. This is why certain exercise DVDs are actually so effective. You know, a lot of trainers are really snobby and they're like, no, you know, don't do P90X. That stuff's worthless. P90X is not worthless. I think it's incredibly unspecific, which I'm always a fan of being specific. But like, if it gets somebody up and moving, I'm a fan. You know, we don't need to be that snobby trainer who's, you know, no, you got to do this. That's not any good. Do this every time. You know, we don't need to do that stuff. Now, as you get more, you know, athletic, as your client increases, right? Yeah, it's going to take a different level. So then we've also got, so type is something you need to consider. The type of exercise is something to be considered in the beginning. You know, what, if it's a new client, just get them moving, right? And then as they get more advanced, it's like, all right, well, now we need to start considering like, what is going to be directly related to your goals? You know, is biking going to help you meet the goal of, you know, whatever it happens to be, right? Maybe not. Great. Biking's eliminated. You want to be a sprinter? Don't do long distance running, do sprinting, right? That's the type part. Kind of getting back to that principle of specificity we talked about the other night. Then we've got oh, this is going in the wrong order. Frickin' thing. Sorry, past Brad. I must have put these notes in the wrong order. Then we've got intensity. Intensity is going to be determined by your frequency. Your frequency is how often you're exercising. But if your intensity is low, your frequency can be high. I guess intensity and frequency are both right here. But intensity is the level of demand compared with your maximal effort. If your intensity is low, your frequency should be high. If your intensity is high, your frequency can be low. This is where we look at like it's like 5 to 7 days per week. If you're going for that 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity, 5 to 7 days per week works really well. I always tell my mom, I want her to get out 3 times a day, 10 minutes at a time and walk. And I want her to get not out of breath. That's not the goal. The goal is just to get the heart rate elevated, which is, why I got her like a specific heart rate monitor. I'm like, you don't need to get up into the orange zone. You just need to get into the green, add a blue. Or, if you are going more intense, you can lower your frequency. You can do it a lot harder and get it done in maybe 3 to 5 days per week. So this right here, guys, this sentence, I need you guys to get this memorized. This was actually on my test. This is one of the very few, I took my test years ago, but this is one of the very few things that I actually remember from my test when I took it to get certified. It was one of the questions and it is still on there. So the recommended frequency and duration of exercise, according to the US, is 150 minutes of low intensity activity per week, or 75 minutes of moderate to high intensity activity per week. You'll sometimes hear that listed as a vigorous activity, right? Both work, moderate to high or vigorous, whatever you want to say. But you will see that specific sentence. That is the recommendation. So I need you to remember 150 of low, 75 of high, okay? Or sometimes you'll see like how many minutes should someone exercise if they're at moderate intensity 5 days per week, and then they'll make you do the little bit of math in your head. You're like, okay, 150 divided by, okay, 30 minutes a day, right? So there's gonna be some variation. As long as you know this statistic, that's a free point on your question or on your test. Next one we got is duration, right? Which is obviously also related to intensity and frequency, right? The duration is how long you're performing it. Typically, this is 45 to 60-minute sessions. That's great if you're trying to build aerobic endurance. And that's why a lot of training sessions are that long. But again, with somebody starting out, you're probably doing shorter, little bursts. Now, before we move forward, I do want to mention these are all the general versions, right? Type, intensity, duration, right? These are all of the general recommendations when the USDA was like, and the FDA were like coming up with like the best ways to like keep Americans healthy. These are the 3 main things they considered, right? Now, personal trainers took it one step farther, and we've got, and there's a lot of personal training certifications out there. There's ACSM, NASM, which is us, ISSA, NESTA, ACE, whatever. I don't care what personal training certification it is, but they have all retooled it into a much easier to memorize version, which I mentioned, I think yesterday, which are your FIT principles. So you see, I put this big asterisk right here in your notes. When considering these variables, NASM is going to break this information down into something that's much easier to digest in the form of what is called FIT principles, F-I-T-T-E, frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment. These are the things you need to consider. So if I'm using Callie as an example, because I asked earlier, frequency would be the number of sessions in a given time period. So I would sit down and say, what type of time commitment do you have available, right? How often can you work out? What does that look like? What does your schedule look like? And that's like, maybe she says, I can do like 3 days per week. Like, let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Now I'm speaking for you, by the way, we're moving quick here. So it's just like, I can do 3 days per week. Great, 3 days per week. I know we want to get to 150 minutes. So frequency, 3 days per week. When I get to time later, I'm going to be like, okay, that is, well, I'm trying to get to 150 minutes. That's going to be 3 50-minute sessions. So I'm probably going to aim for an hour, right? Now, my intensity is the level of demand of the activity. So because we're only doing 3 days per week and we've got days of rest built in, I can be pretty intense. We can actually go pretty hard, right? Relative to, whatever that performance looks like for you. And so my intensity is going to be moderate to vigorous, moderate at the low end, vigorous at the high end, for that type of frequency. The time is the length of time. Again, I'm doing 3 days per week. I need to hit 150 minutes. So that's going to be about a 50-minute session up to an hour, right? And remember, this is all like, what we're considering for a beginner to get healthy, right? So the length of time is going to be like, all right, well, let's do 3 1-hour sessions, and that's going to definitely cover that 150 minute. Now, the type is the mode of activity. Your type is like what you are considering. I know I'm going to avoid spin bikes, right? You said you're a big fan of the weights, so I'm probably going to do some strength training / cardio / endurance, style. So probably involve lifting weights. We'll probably do it as circuit style. So that like we do multiple exercises in a row, that's going to maximize calorie burn while also maximizing like cardiorespiratory endurance, right? And we're going to limit the rest. We're going to keep you moving. You walk through that door, we're going to start working, and we're not done working until you leave, right? And then the enjoyment factor is the level of pleasure. Now, this one is the one that actually NASM added. Regular fit principles stop at FITT. But the enjoyment is huge because you could write the world's greatest program, but if you're not going to get your client to do it, doesn't matter, right? Guess what? It's not the world's greatest program anymore. A crappy program that somebody does frequently is more effective than a great program that someone is not willing to do. Again, this is why those freaking Tybo DVDs got so many Americans in shape, They were effective. They may not have been the world's greatest workout, but they were easy to follow and they were approachable. That's why P90X does work. It has a place in this world. I don't think it's the best, but at least the enjoyment factor was there. So it's the level of pleasure, right? We're avoiding that spin bike. We're going to do something we like. I used to love doing boot camps with like a really goofy theme. I used to teach boot camps and I would do these weird themes every time. And like, it was right when the Avengers movies were coming out and I had like an Avenger themed workout. You may hate squat jumps, but people love Captain America ducks. And Captain America ducks are nothing more than a squat jump. I would literally have people, doing this, and they would like get down and hide behind the shield, and then they would jump and get down again. It's goofy, it's dumb, it's silly, but I made it fun just by relabeling the freaking thing, and that level of enjoyment factor keeps people coming back, and that's what keeps people like on their exercise programs. So again, these are all things that we need to consider when writing a program. All right. Any questions on any of that so far, or comments, guys? Open discussion. Any questions, comments, or concerns? How's everybody feeling? Cool. Oh, Callie, I can see you're unmuted. Do you have something?
Oh no, I was enjoying your squat move. That was great. What'd you rename it as?
I called them Captain America ducks because he has to get behind the shield.
Awesome. Okay, noted.
I had a whole here. I'll show you. I can't open. Why is my chat bubble not opening? I saw somebody type something. Tired. I had a whole, it was the main like 6 Avengers, and it was a 6 exercise circuit. It was this Captain America, ducks, and then it was Hawkeye, arrow pulls, which was, if you've ever done like man makers where you got the dumbbells in hand and you do the row while you're in the plank position. It was like you're pulling back the bow. And then it was like, I called them, was it Thor strikes? And it was where you would hold the dumbbell here and do a reverse lunge. And then like, oh no, it was this way. You'd hold the dumbbell here and then call the thunder. And then Black Widow was, we would call them sexy spiders. And it was where you would get down and like bring your arm up like this. And then it was basically an ice skater. Hulk smashes, which were forward squat jumps, and you'd slam the ground. And then and then the last one was like an Ironman. I call it Ironman blasters, I think, and it was just doing a basically high plank bird dog, where you do like going up like that, kicking your nightstand. But yeah, that used to be like one of my staples at my boot camp, and people loved it. You know, it was goofy and dumb and silly, but people had fun, and that keeps them exercising. So
I agree. The enjoyment factor is huge, and like not fully taking them out of their element in the beginning. And I agree with you. My mom hates to work out, and so I just get her to like walk with me or do something, you know, just, you know, in her element, so she gets moving. So
good.
Yeah, something's better than nothing because she hates working out. So
right, but she likes spending time with you, right? Put them together. All right, so let's look at prescribing intensity. So there's all the very holistic approach to exercise. But now let's get a little more scientific here and start using some numbers, right? So now how do we prescribe exercise intensity based on your client's performance? Like, let's say your client's in X amount of shape. How do we give them enough intensity to, you know, we know that they're overloading their body. We're applying that principle, that progressive overload. But at the same time, we're not pushing them too hard to where they maybe not be able to keep up. Well, that's where we have your target heart rate, okay? So target heart rate is basing your exercise prescription on your client's ability, you know, their cardiovascular system's ability to keep up. And so we have the heart rate reserve method. This is the best sort of gold standard way that we decide to do this. And so, you know, I could just do a percentage of heart rate max, right? This is this version that we're seeing right here. The regular percentage of heart rate max would simply be prescribing your intensity based on a percentage of heart rate max. Now, what heart rate max is, by the way, and this is another formula you're actually going to want to have memorized, but regular old straight percentage formula heart rate max is literally 220, and it's always 220, minus your client's age equals heart rate max. Okay, so if I'm trying to figure out like what someone's heart rate max is, I literally just take the number 220 and I subtract their age. If they're 19 years old, it's 220 minus 19. Their max heart rate is 201. If I want them to work out at 65% of that heart rate max, I would take 201 and I'd multiply it by 65%. And I would say, whoops, oh, that was 19. I would say, all right, Kenny, I want your heart rate to be 131 beats per minute at the lowest. And I would say like maybe 201 times 0.75. And that gives me a range of, you know, up to 151. So I'd say I want your heart rate to be somewhere between 131 and 151. If it goes above 151, it's too high. If it goes below 131, it's too low. So now I've got you between 65 and 75%. So that would be the classic heart rate max formula. So it's target heart rate equals heart rate max times intensity. It's not bad. It's not a bad formula, but here's the problem, right? What if I've got two people who are exactly the same age, and one of them has worked out every single day of their life, and the other person has never walked into a gym before. They've never been active, right? Well, their heart rate max is going to be the same, right? The formula is identical. It's just based on their age. It's not very specific to that person. Well, going back to some of our earlier lessons, what do we know about our heart as we get stronger? Our heart rate slows down because it's able to do more work in less beats. So if I've got somebody whose resting heart rate is taken into account, you know, these two people are the same age, but one of their resting heart rates is much higher than the other person's, that's going to change what type of workout I need to give them. And that's where we have the target heart rate using a percentage of what is called the heart rate reserve formula. This is more commonly referred to as the Karvanen method, named after the person who discovered it. And so this is based on the difference between your max heart rate, which is that 220 minus your age, and your resting heart rate, which is your heart rate when you are at rest. You know, two people who are the same age, they have the same max heart rate, but they're going to have different resting heart rates. And so this is going to determine your intensity by taking into the difference between those two. This formula is a little bit more complicated. So it's going to be your target heart rate equals your heart rate max minus your resting heart rate. Then you multiply it by your intensity, but you got to add your resting heart rate back on at the end. Okay. So let's look at two examples, right? We'll say a 30-year-old client, right? So we go down here. Here's my 30-year-old client. So if I go 220 minus 30, that means my max heart rate's 190. If I want to have a desired intensity of between 65 and 75% of their intensity, I take 190 and I multiply it by 65%, and I multiply it by 75%. I don't need to actually calculate. That gives me a target heart rate range of, we'll round this up to 124 and we'll round this up to 143. So without taking into account their individual differences, both 30-year-old clients are going to get 124 to 143. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody having trouble with that? Sometimes I move through the math stuff too quickly. So if I do, stop me. But if I take into account a client who's 30 years old and their resting heart rate is 75 beats per minute, so I would take 30, I take 220 minus 30, it gives me the max heart rate of 190, so that's the same. And then their resting heart rate is 75. So I'm going to take 190, heart rate max, I'm going to subtract 75, then I'm going to multiply that by 65%. And then all I got to do is I got to tack on their resting heart rate back on at the end. So now that gives me a range of 149.75, so we'll say 150. And then if we do 75%, that's a range, you know, between 161. So here's what's also interesting about this. This is 150 to 161. This is 123 to 142, right? So that's 124 to 143, actually. This is a smaller range than this. So that's also more specific that way, which we really, really, really like. I'll show you guys my Karvanen numbers versus somebody who's typically my age, right? And by the way, if you want to calculate your Karvanen numbers, obviously you can do this formula here if you were a math whiz, but you can also go and just Google Karvanen calculator. And then this is the one that I prefer. I've been using this website. This website is so old. I've been using this website literally since I started as a personal trainer. And you can even see, like, you're like, whoo, there's no Java in this baby. But I'm 32. My resting heart rate is about 56 beats per minute. I'm going to hit calculate here. Now, my old target heart rate zones, if I wanted to be between 65 and 75%, that would be 122 to 141 in the old method. But the new method gives me 142 to 155. So if I did the old method, I wouldn't even be working out, right? Because it took into account my resting heart rate. So this is a much, much more accurate formula. This reflects a cardiovascular system that has been training for cardio, right? And, you know, luckily I actually did exactly all of this yesterday. Yesterday, you know, I was getting up, I wanted to be between 85 and 95% of my heart rate max. And there was a lot of times where I was hitting right around like 176 multiple times during like my sprint sessions. And that was right in the middle of that range that I was aiming for. And then I would let myself recover about back to 142, about 145 is usually what I was targeting for. Once I hit that number, I would go again. And that was how I did my interval training yesterday. So knowing your target heart rate is a really handy tool in prescribing intensity. There's also a target Vo2 max. Now, targeting your Vo2 max is also really, really a great way to do this, but you have to know what your client's Vo2 max is. So it requires monitoring your Vo2 max and your oxygen consumption, which is pretty difficult. It requires some specialized equipment. We don't usually have access to that in a typical gym setting. But if you have a client who does know their Vo2 max, it'll be tied to their specific heart rate. And so like we can look at a Vo2 max Test results core cardio coach. So this is a really common company, the cardio coach here. And here's someone's VO2 results. And so, we tie it to their heart rate, but we know what their specific zones are. So it's like, if I'm trying to teach them to train for anaerobic, I'm going to get their heart rate somewhere between 150 and 160. And if I want them to be aerobic, so I'm trying to build endurance, I'm going to keep them between 130 and 140. And you can see those zones down here. So VO2 max is also a really good targeter. Vo2 Max is a really handy tool, but you got to go actually do it. It's like a, it costs money. But if you guys ever get a chance, I really do recommend it. It's a great investment in your own health if you're trying to be incredibly specific about stuff. Now, other ways that we can exercise, that we can monitor intensity. What if you're not willing to do any of that? Or what if it's a brand new client? Or, what if your client's like, I don't know how to take my heart rate, and they don't have a heart rate monitor? Well, luckily, there are other scales. There's what is called the Rpe scale, or the Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale. And this involves basically rating how hard you feel like you are working based on the perception of your effort that you're giving, right? So you're going to literally ask your client how hard the exercise is. So the Borg scale, which is the Rpe scale, and you're going to need to know both those names. It'll either be referred to as the Borg scale or it'll be referred to as the Rpe scale, is a scale of 6 to 20 to measure your intensity, with 6 being basically, you sitting upright in bed in the morning, and 20 being like, I am about to die. Like, that is my maximal effort. I literally cannot work any harder. And so we are always going to be in a mixture of that. So if we look at like the Borg scale, this is, and that's the modified Borg scale. You can see this picture that I put up here is starting at 7. They're not showing you the whole chart, but generally, like, very light exercise starts around a 7. Generally, I tell my clients we want them to warm up somewhere around an 11 on the Borg scale. Level 13 is like, zone 1. This is like where you're actually working out, doing your cardio. But somewhere between a 12 and 13. Somewhere between a 15 and a 16 is where it's like moderate intensity cardio. And then like anything from like a 17 to 20 is like very, very, very hard. Now, that 6 to 20 scale is sometimes a little weird because you're like, how am I supposed to think on a scale of 6 to 20? I'm used to thinking on a scale of 1 to 10, right? So luckily there is a modified Borg scale. And the modified Borg scale will basically look something kind of like this, with, you're generally warming up with light activity. It's 2 to 3 in terms of how difficult it is. Somewhere between 4 to 6 is like your marathon pace. You should be able to hold a conversation pretty easily here. 7 to 8 being very vigorous, a 9 being very difficult, and then 10 is your max effort. So those are our general Borg scales there. That's one method you can do. So you can get your client, the more effectively they use that scale and they communicate and you practice that, it'll get more and more accurate with more practice. But yeah, nobody's going to be perfect right away. And so you're like, I want you to be between like a 13 or a 14. And then like they're doing it. And then you're talking to them and you're like, how hard does this feel? And it's like, oh yeah, I could do this for like 3 hours. And it's like, okay, let's make it a little tougher, right? Like, let's pick that up a little bit, right? And it gets, like I said, it'll get more accurate the more often you use it with your client. Another method that's highly associated with the Borg scale, with the Rpe scale, is the talk test method. Talk test method also measures exercise intensity based on how easy it is for your client to talk. When we're warming up, you shouldn't even be able to hear any breath in the conversation. It should sound like, warming up should be actually somewhat around like how we can talk, even if we're just sitting upright. But if you're doing like low to moderate intensity activity, they should be able to hold a conversation pretty comfortably, right? If I'm trying to build your endurance, I probably want you to be able to hold a conversation the whole time. That's my mom. When I'm talking, I took my mom on a couple walks while I was back home for Christmas. And, there were a lot of times where I was like, I could tell she was like getting out of breath. And I was like, And she's like, no, this is great. I'm really working. I'm like, I don't want you to work right now. I want you to build endurance. We can do that hard work later. That's great, but it's not our goal right now. So let's bring it back a little bit. And we slow down. And she was like, nah, that's not what I think working out is. Working out is, I'm supposed to get out of breath. And I'm like, not our goal. Like for now, I want you to get like endurance. Once you can do this low intensity stuff for an hour, then I can get you out of breath. And that's where we start getting into the medium intensity, right? Medium intensity is where they're partially out of breath. They're probably speaking in like broken sentences, right? Where it's like, yeah, I feel good. I'm able to keep this up. I can do this for a long time. I just need a couple seconds to breathe every now and then, right? Like that's your medium intensity. That's great, right? So low intensity is like they're breathy. You can hear it, but they should be able to do it. It's your marathon pace, right? Medium intensity is like your 5K pace, right? Where maybe you have to slow down as you're going up hills, but like you're able to, work relatively hard. And then we got high intensity. Your high intensity is your super difficulty breathing, right? This is where it's really getting tough. You should be out of breath, right? I always tell my clients, don't think of it as like you have to work hard. Think of it as like, how do I get out of breath? How do I make sure that like I need to recover once this round of intensity is over with, right? Retool your thinking a little bit. One of my favorite overall weight loss programs, when I'm starting a client on like a really low intensity weight loss program, one of my favorite things to do is like an upper body exercise paired with a lower body exercise paired with 2 minutes of cardio. And so they'll do set 1, 2 minutes of cardio, set 2, 2 minutes of cardio. And that gives them plenty of time to recover before they come back and hit that muscle again. But the 2 minutes of cardio boosts their calorie burn pretty substantially. And like I always tell them, I'm like, don't think of it as like go, get on the treadmill for 2 minutes. What I want you to do is I want you to try to get out of breath in that 2 minutes. If that happens in the first 15 seconds and you got to spend the rest of that 2 minute period just recovering from that initial 15 seconds, that is perfectly what I'm looking for. I would rather you get to 1 minute and 59 seconds and have to tap out and not finish the 2 minutes than I would for you to get to the end of that 2 minutes and be like, I could have done that for 20 minutes, right? Not what I'm looking for. So that's where we get into the high intensity, right? Your speaking should be very, very, very difficult. And then there's also targeting using METs. METs are really, these are your metabolic equivalents. METs are kind of a hard one to quantify, but what a MET is it is 3.5 milliliters times your weight in kilograms. It is your oxygen consumption per minute. So basically, all of us, in terms of our oxygen consumption, it's around 3.5 milliliters of oxygen for every kilogram of our body weight per minute when we are at rest. So you're always burning about 1 MET per minute at rest. If you were working twice as hard as you are at rest, you're burning 2 METs per minute, 3 times as hard, 3 METs per minute, right? And so sometimes you'll see METs on a treadmill. I don't really like using METs with my clients in order to tell them like how much energy I want to burn, but I do love using METs as a way to quantify for my clients how much work they got done. So like if I put somebody on a treadmill and it says that they did 26 METs, I'm like, you just burned 26 times as many calories as, you would have had to watch 26 episodes of Netflix to burn this many calories, and you got it done in this many minutes. So I like METs for that. I think that they're a fun like motivator, but I don't typically use them for actually prescribing intensity for my clients. So those are all the different methods, right? We've got some very quantifiable, scientific, like very, very measurement heavy versions there. And then we've got some, more holistic versions there where, we're just encouraging our clients to feel it out, right? So very objective measurements. We've got some very subjective measurements. All of them are very, very, very good tools at your disposal. And when we get to our program design class at the end of this mod, we're going to talk about like which ones are the best to implement for certain clients. If your client's a super nerd, get objective on their ass, like if they're like if they're real science about it, great. give them numbers. They respond super well to numbers. If they're more of just like a motivated person who wants to feel it out, great. Give them the talk test, right? All of them are good. These are all different tools at our disposal. And like I said, we'll come back to these later. Do you guys have any questions or comments on any of that? Questions, comments, concerns?
I'm pretty good, bro.
Love it. Charlie, this is kind of a different pace, right? You started your first mod in the sports mod. Sports mod is all about like very objective. It's all very number based. The weight loss mod's a little more.
Yeah, there's more info in this mod.
Yeah, different, right?
Way more, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, this is our most information dense class out of everything, other than maybe kinesiology, because kinesiology you got to memorize like a bunch of muscle names and stuff. But yeah, it definitely feels different. All right. So guys, that is actually the end of our notes here. So this is the stuff that's probably going to be on your homework. The rest of the information on this PowerPoint is just talking about like what these diseases are. I already kind of talked about these briefly, so I'm going to move through these next slides pretty quickly. But we're going to talk about like what these diseases are just slightly in more detail. So heart disease, mostly caused by like plaque building up on typically our coronary arteries, but this can be any artery in the body. So we look at what's called atherosclerosis, okay? Atherosclerosis is where an artery gets plaque buildup. Now, what is plaque? Well, it can be a lot of materials, but typically it is cholesterol building up on the walls of our blood vessels. And so you've heard me talk about how there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, right? Your good cholesterol is the dense stuff. I want you to think about it, like it's dense, it's moving through, it's like pipe cleaner. Because of how dense it is, it's knocking stuff off the walls. So that's your HDL cholesterol, high density lipoproteins. Then you have your bad cholesterol, that's your low density lipoproteins, your LDL cholesterol. I always tell people, think of it this way, it's your lazy density lipoproteins. It's the LDL. It is lazy. It is taking a nap on your blood vessels, right? And so because of that, it's parking itself there and it's grabbing other ones. And the other ones are like, you're napping? I'm napping, right? And then it grabs onto that and then it builds up. That is plaque. Just like, you know, plaques on your teeth, right? This is plaque on your blood vessels. Different types of plaque. I don't know jack about teeth, by the way. But when that builds up, that increases your blood pressure. Now, if that happens in your coronary arteries, which are the arteries that supply the thing that pumps blood around your entire body, right? And that builds up, that can lead to a heart attack, right? Your big risk factors here are genetics. Some people are more likely. This is why your doctor, when you go in, they ask you, like, do you have a history? Does your family have a history of heart disease? Some of it can be genetics. We see like specific receptors that are more sensitive to like bad cholesterols and stuff, or synthesizing more. But I also think a lot of this, one of the reasons they ask about your family history, sometimes it's not really just in your DNA. Sometimes it's also about like, what did you see growing up? What did you grow up around? You know, what habits were formed when you were a kid that are probably playing in a factor as you're an adult, you know? That can change the way, you know, you eat and exercise and things. So how do we reduce the risk factors of this? Well, again, general exercise, right? General exercise has really positive effects. It's an effective way to lose weight. It's an effective way to improve your endurance aerobically. It's going to improve your blood pressure, and it's going to decrease your risk of overall cardiovascular disease while improving your lipid profile. Guys especially, we respond really well to pulling cholesterol out of our blood thanks to the production of testosterone, but women also use cholesterol to produce certain hormones. And so when your body exercises, which raises your hormone levels in a really, really, really positive way, your body's got to get ingredients to make those new hormones. So it might pull them from your blood vessels, and now that stuff's not stuck on the walls anymore. That's awesome. So exercise literally cleans out your blood vessels in really, really positive ways. And it can decrease your risk of what's called a myocardial infarction, which is a big fancy way of saying heart attack. by eating right and coupling that with an active lifestyle, and you are pulling those cholesterols off those blood vessel walls, you're cleaning out. That's going to lower your blood pressure. And it's also going to make sure that you are always keeping a nice steady supply of oxygen and blood to your heart muscle. And we're keeping that heart muscle alive. We are also going to see, skeletal muscle helps in avoiding what we call pathophysiologic changes, right? Basically, exercising regularly makes stronger and makes more proteins, particularly those actin and myosin fibers we've been talking about in class, inside of all your muscle fibers. It makes bigger muscles, and those bigger muscles have really positive effects because they're hungry tissues. That hungry tissue burns more calories passively than any other type of tissue in the body. And again, that also helps clean out your blood. So we like strength, right? We actually really do appreciate developing strength, right? The ability of a muscle to generate force. And so resistance training has been shown to have really positive effects on your muscular strength, but also your muscular endurance, and improves your metabolism. Now, remember, we've talked a lot about metabolism in this class so far. It's the overall, amount of any chemical reactions happening in your body. A part of that conversation is how many calories you are burning every day. Muscles are hungry, guys. And so you cannot change your DNA's pre-programmed version of metabolism, like how much cellular energy your cells, that's going to be determined by your thyroid hormones and all this other stuff. But you know what exercise does? It makes more tissue, and that tissue is hungry, and that tissue takes energy to run. So that is how you raise your metabolism. Let me just show you here. If you look at the basal metabolic rate, let's take a look at a BMR calculator here. So let's say somebody's 25 years old, they're 5'10" and 160 pounds, and they have a body fat percentage of 20%. Let me hit calculate here. They're going to burn 1,624 calories per day simply by existing. That is the basal number they burn. If they were in a coma, they would burn that many calories. If they slept for 24 hours, they would burn that many calories. But let's say their body fat percentage is 10%. So they weigh the same, but clearly, right, if they were at 20%, that means that they had 128 pounds of muscle. Same person, 160 pounds, and they've got 10% body fat. They have 144 pounds of muscle. So the 20% body fat person had 128 pounds of muscle. The 10% body fat person has 144 pounds of muscle. So because muscle is such a metabolically active material, if we hit calculate, they go from 1,624 calories per day to 1,781 calories per day. It's a pretty substantial difference, right? So muscle burns a lot of energy. So by working on your strength, you are increasing how many calories you burn naturally. When we're trying to balance the books in terms of calories in versus calories out, that's going to make our life a lot easier, right? This is why trainers love legs so much. The reason trainers love doing legs and squats and this and that, 60% of all of the muscle in your body is from your waist down, which is surprising when you think about it. You're like, man, my upper body is so much bigger than my, just these two sticks on the bottom of my body. But those leg muscles are densely, they are all muscle. Whereas your upper body, this looks really large, but your rib cage is taking up a lot of space. 60% of all of your muscle is your legs. And so if I can put 5 pounds of muscle on your legs, you're not going to look that much different, but you are going to burn way more calories. And that's going to make our job of losing weight a lot easier. So we love that. We also love that it builds muscular endurance, which we're a really big fan of, right? The ability to sustain effort over a long period of time. And, when we have the ability to do sustained effort over a really long period of time, that's going to increase our ability to burn calories. We're going to have more energy throughout the day. This is one of the most common goals that people walk into the gym with. It's like, what do you want to work on? And it's like, you want to lose weight, you want to gain muscle, you want to get more athletic. What are you looking for? And it's like, I just want to have more energy. I feel bad. I feel tired all the time. I'm taking naps every day. Great, let's get up. Let's get you moving. Let's build some endurance, right? And then muscular power is always great too. You know, strength training does improve your power and your speed of movement. So if your goal is like, you know, athleticism, you can have those short, big bursts of energy. We love that. You know, that's really positive stuff. So we've, you know, and we've already talked a lot about all of this stuff in this class overall, but like when it comes to prescribing resistance training, right? We really look for a resistance in, this is general recommendations. When a doctor, who again is not an expert on exercise, they're an expert on medicine, right? Prescribes exercise for someone, they'll usually say keep it around 10 reps. And that's actually a pretty good recommendation. It's a general, but very good recommendation. So if you can do a couple, you know, if you start with just one set of 10, that's a great place to start. Someone who's never started in the gym before, you do what's called a single set program. And a single set program is basically one set per exercise. You'll see these set up actually in gyms sometimes. You'll see like the crunch, they call it the power hour, I think. Power half hour. And it's this circuit. I'm going to turn this on and I'm going to mute it. It's this circuit of like all of these machines that try to hit basically every muscle in the body. If you were to take a brand new client through that circuit, there you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, and just do one set of 10 repetitions. That's not a lot. It's not specific, but it is a great way to start building strength. Then they get better at it. We can start incorporating multiple sets. And then we can start getting into, you know, something a little bit more advanced. So, you know, they're going to have some neuromuscular adaptations. They're going to develop an aerobic and anaerobic system and some athletic skills there. Now, obviously, we are much more specific than that. And we're not always a big fan of machines, but I always like to be very balanced when I am considering like what is good for people. I rarely do machines with my clients. I like free weights. Free weights cause you to work, you know, more on stability, which I think bulletproofs your body from injury much better than machines where every rep is the same. And, you know, it's also designed at an angle that may not be appropriate for your client. But I do think that they have their place in the world. So they can be a very effective tool. And that's where we start to pivot here. You can see here. So that's the benefits of just regular resistance training, but then the benefits of an individualized exercise prescription. Obviously, regular exercise has really positive effects, but if we are looking at being very specific to our individuals and like what their needs are, you know, Callie, your stretches are going to be different from mine. Mine are going to be different from Cody's. Cody's, yours are going to be different from Charlie's. Charlie's, you're going to be different from Kenny's. Kenny and I are really similar, though. You and I are both hamstring guys. And that's where we got to be very specific about like what we need. But let's say somebody has arthritis, right? Arthritis is a condition that, like I said, we're going to have a whole day on arthritis later down the program. But generally, aquatic exercise is going to be a really effective method because that's going to take a lot of the pressure off of their joints. Heavy weightlifting is not often recommended for arthritis. So generally, we want to go sort of moderate intensity, moderate duration exercise. But we got to be careful because it can cause, you know, inflammation, and then that might take them out of the gym, you know, for a couple of days. And so, yeah, you got a really great workout in one day, but then that cost you 3 other days. So it may not be worth it, right? So with arthritis, we got to be really careful there. Asthma, generally our needs that we are looking for, again, is very endurance-based. We are focusing on duration here. So your exercise training somewhere from 30 to 60 minutes, if they can handle that, 3 to 5 days per week. And you may have to build up to it. It may, you know, we want 30 to 60 total minutes. Maybe that's 3 10-minute rounds instead of just a straight 30-minute session. Cancer patients, we're going to spend a lot of time focusing particularly on resistance and flexibility training. The medications associated with cancer treatment really cause a massive loss of muscle mass. I can't believe I said that without stuttering. And so because of that, strength training is huge. And then also it causes a lot of like loss of flexibility. And so flexibility is huge. And also cardio. Really, cancer patients need a lot of work. Endurance, and strength and flexibility. Clients with COPD, that's a chronic obstructive pulmonary, so lung disorder. We are really looking at trying to do intermittent exercise. And then cycling is really good. It's got swimming up here. I've seen swimming be like on the anti-recommendations for COPD, depending on who you ask here. But the reason we like cycling and walking in particular, COPD causes a lot of shortness of breath. So even doing lifting weights for cardio can prove challenging. Generally with COPD, lifting weights is good for strength building. But we often don't use weight circuits for COPD clients for their cardio, because it will often like put them into a posture that traps their airways, and it makes it difficult for them to get air in. So they'll get shortness of breath, and that can cause like lightheadedness. So cycling is a really great option because that's strictly lower body and it doesn't affect their ability to stay upright and breathe. Walking is another one. That's why swimming, which, you know, you have to hold your breath. Holding your breath is exceptionally difficult for people with COPD. So we're seeing it as a recommendation here. I've seen it as an anti-recommendation or a contraindication in other places. So I'm going to I want you to take that one, that one right there with a grain of salt. Coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. All three of these, we do know that elevated heart rate is going to be key. We're really focusing on sub-maximal cardiovascular exercise. So because their heart is not performing very effectively, we want to make sure that we are being sub-maximal. You should not be taking someone with heart disease, you know, up to 95% of their heart rate max, right? They probably cannot deal with that level of stress. So we focus on low intensity cardio until we build their cardiovascular strength. But every one of your workouts should somewhat be based on something for that cardiovascular disease condition, right? Particularly high blood pressure. I think I mentioned this on day one, actually, but doing what is called a peripheral heart action circuit, doing an upper body exercise, then doing a lower body exercise, then an upper body exercise again. You're basically sending blood flow up and then back down and then up and then back down. That's some of the best stuff you can do. So I really like 4 exercises in a row: chest, quads, back, hamstrings. That is one of my favorite, very, very simple, very easy to replicate ways to go up, down, up, down. And then if we start getting into like more specific, I'll go core, shoulders if I do 6 exercises. And that's a great way to just, they're doing little reps for their blood vessels, right? Their body sends a whole bunch of blood upper body. Then all of a sudden it has to send it lower body. And let's switch back and forth. For clients with diabetes, we really like a combination of like walking, jogging, and cycling. Low to moderate intensity. Although high intensity has really positive effects on diabetes because we know that high intensity primarily uses glycogen as a fuel source. So by using that sugar as a fuel source, their body will actually become more insulin resistant. More insulin sensitive, which is exactly what we're looking for. We want their body to say, oh my God, that's insulin, and then use it, right? Rather than being resistant to that insulin, which is the problem that they're already having. High intensity exercise has been shown to do that. But you'll notice that's not what's recommended here. The reason for that is if you start by doing that, you can actually cause a diabetic's blood sugar to crash. It will pull all of the sugar out of their blood, and because they're taking insulin synthetically, and then all of a sudden they can get really nauseous, they can throw up, or they can pass out, and you can put them into, you know, a very dangerous place. So it is recommended low to moderate, and then you will do bouts of high intensity. And lastly, or no, 2 more. Oh no, 3 more. Obesity and overweight. Obesity, our primary, goal is to simply burn calories, right? So we're trying to look for 30 to 60 minutes, moderate intensity, right? They may not have any other comorbidities. They may not have any other like conditions they're dealing with. So what's our goal? Burn some freaking calories. Done, right? The world is your oyster. You like weights? Great. You like running? Great. We're good with all of it. Peripheral vascular disease. So this is if somebody has like varicose veins or peripheral arterial disease. Your intensity needs to be moderate to low. This can cause like blood clot. If you have a client that has like blood clot problems, you got to be careful because you're going to be managing their pain. Blood clots are extremely painful because they are literally feeling their blood vessels like stretch because there's so much blood going through it because it's pooling. So a lot of times this is where if you can alternate between like standing and sitting in your workouts, you can really take some of the pressure off of their legs and take that pain away. And even like I've had sessions where like I'll have to take a 5-minute break at the like 30-minute mark, like right in the middle of my session. And I'll lay my client onto a bench and let them get their feet up in the air. We can just drain some of that blood out of their legs. And then they're good. Pain goes away. We start working out again. So that's one thing to be aware of with vascular disease. And then lastly, if you got a client who has like a spinal cord injury or sarcopenia, these are both things that are going to reduce their strength massively. The spinal cord injury is going to reduce their nervous system strength. The sarcopenia is less muscle fibers, so they just aren't very strong. So you're going to have to lower your intensity below what we normally have our clients lift at, and you're going to go 60 to 70% of their 1 rep max, and then slowly work your way up from there. That's usually going to be a lot of your senior clients. And those are some general recommendations that, you know, I moved through extremely quickly. But now they're going to sound familiar when we bring them up in the classes where you got to put it in your notes. And each of those diseases will get their own day where we have literally like a several-hour discussion about them individually, but later on in the program. The stuff that's in your notes, that's what's important for now. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Kenny, Callie, Cody, Charlie? Oh my God, we got all C's too. No, Kenny's with me.
Yeah, I'm good.
That sounds like a C.
And the only thing that was a little confusing for me was actually the like the BMI and the actual numbers when you did like the point some. I didn't really quite catch all of that. So
yeah, BMI or BMR?
BMR. How you calculated all of that. Go ahead.
I'm actually going to teach you how to calculate that. Is it tomorrow? I think it's, or not tomorrow, but Tuesday. Let me check here. I think it's in Tuesday's lesson.
Okay.
But I will still talk about the concept here in just a second. Where is it?
I think it was like 0.65. I don't know how you calculated that. So that was like a little fast for me to catch.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. Oh, that was the heart rate max, the 0.65 versus 0.75.
Yeah.
That's not the BMR. That's actually our intensity based on max effort. So okay. I'll pull you up a picture here. I'll pull you up a chart. All right. So so here's a general picture of like heart rate training zones that are associated with those VO2 scores I was talking about earlier. So if you're between 50 and 60% of your like maximum heart rate, that's pretty light exercise. This is like pre-warm-up. If you're going for like 60 to 70%, if your goal is to like really build up your endurance and just be able to go for like 30 uninterrupted minutes, generally you want to be somewhere between 60 and 70, because if you go up to like 90%, you can only keep that up for a few minutes, right? This is where a lot of people who start like cardio programs, they're just like, oh, I can't run a mile. And it's like, yes, you can. You're just currently running a mile too quickly. Because you're going so fast, you're ending up in these zones here that force you to have to slow down. So we got to slow your pace up until we build up your endurance. Then we can start speeding you up later. But you can see it's 60 to 70 here. Moderate is about 70 to 80. So what you would do is you would calculate what someone's heart rate is, right? Using that Karvanen formula. So again, I would go Karvanen calculator here, or I would do the math myself. and I would punch in the information and hit calculate. And then I would go, okay, so somewhere between, that's the 0.6. That's how you get that, is like 60%, or 0.7, which is 70%. And there's my zones, depending on what my goal is, right? Does that make sense now?
Yeah, so it's the carbon in formula that you look up. Okay.
Yep. By the way, NASM zones look slightly different. NASM doesn't do 60 to 70, 70 to 80. They start at 65. Man, where's the picture that I want? This is close, but like, all right, I guess I'll just pull this one up. I don't like this chart as much, but it'll serve its purposes for now. So NASM's got 3 cardio stages, or cardio zones. Zone 1 is 65 to 75. So it sort of straddles the other version, right? Rather than being even numbers, it puts it on the 5. 65 to 75, 76 to 85, 86 to 95. And that's zone 1, 2, or 3. So advanced clients are going to get zone 3, moderate clients are going to get zone 2, and beginner clients are going to get zone 1. And that's how we break that down. So that's why I was using the numbers 0.65 and 0.75.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Good question. Any other questions? Love questions. Well, all right. That is actually all I got for you guys today. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.